I have to apologize to this group because I'm very upset. And I had a testimony prepared, and I don't want to cry either. But first and foremost, thank you, Rep. Whelan, Senator Marr, Rep. Comey, and all of the other reps that's escaping my head right now. I am Georgia Goldburn. I'm the director of Hope for New Haven, and we manage the Hope Child Development Center in New Haven. I'm also co-founder of CERCLE, a group of 38 amazing women and men who serve underprivileged and vulnerable children and families. And I meet with them every other week on a Saturday for 2 hours talking about how we can make the state better, how we can help families, and how we can cover children. During the pandemic in 2020, I went to my staff and I said to them, you can go home and collect unemployment and make way more money than you're making here. And they said, no, thank you. We want to stay here and be available for our children and our families. And I was so proud of them and so ashamed as a provider because I I wanted to pay, I've always wanted to pay my staff more, but I just didn't have the resources to do it. And I wanted to help my parents, which thanks to the Early Start grant, we achieved something I'd hoped for a very long time, which was to help parents. And as I'm sitting listening to a statement saying, I don't want to pay for anybody else's childcare, I'm reminded of that moment when my staff and so many other family childcare providers in the CERCLE network and across the state put aside their fears for themselves and their family and serve the state of Connecticut to deal with a pandemic and a crisis so that doctors can go to work and care for the elderly, care for the sick, and care for the constituents of this state. That was such a selfless act of all of those people. So to hear a statement like, I don't want to pay for somebody else. Well, for years, childcare providers have been picking up the check of the cost of this state. I always tell my folks to tell their story. And I've heard stories from so many providers about the fact that their cars have been repossessed, their lights have been turned off. For me personally, in 2019, was the hardest year because Care for Kids was not paying us because they were 4 months behind. DCF was not paying us because that's just DCF. And I could not cash my check. I was receiving a check, but I couldn't cash my check. And my credit that I spent years to build to get to 840 collapsed to 660 because I was putting everything on my credit card and paying late fee on my mortgage. I don't have a child. People will say I have 76 children in my facilities and 1,000 in the CERCLE network. But I paid extra in fees when I went to go change my car. I was paying interest rate that I've never seen because of the care that I took care to manage my finances. But when you're in childcare, you're making sacrifices all the time, financial sacrifices. I've heard providers, one provider shared that she was laying on the ground of her facility to prevent UI from cutting off her light. You see, there is a cost. There is always a cost. But what happened is we have relegated that cost, that big paycheck, that big payment to support this state and all the industries that's in the state on the back of poor people, poor women, and more specifically, poor Black and brown women, who are the main people that are in this work. And so for me, sitting here, I have a lovely testimony that I'm going to submit, but to sit here and to hear someone say, I don't want to do this. I don't want to pay the costs. And what about the time when Connecticut was booming and great? Connecticut was booming and great because we passed the bill on to other people, these childcare providers who have stood in the melee and the storm to keep this state going. And we simply are just asking, stop asking us to pay the cost to care for Connecticut's children. We're tired. The reason why there is a workforce pipeline issue is because people are tired and they just want to make a living wage. That's all we're asking for people to do. I went to the emergency room a couple weeks ago and I have a $5,000 bill because I don't have insurance. And if I go through Connecticut Health, I don't make enough to qualify to pay for my health insurance, or I don't make too little to get the big subsidy. So I have to pay out of pocket. And so to sit here and to hear after these incredible women's story and men, there are men in the early care realm of their personal sacrifice, of them picking up the cost every single day on behalf of Connecticut's children and families. It is deeply wounding. And I've heard the other side, but I don't, maybe I'm just exhausted today, just like everybody else. But it is deeply wounding to see the sacrifice that we make every day. And folks to say, for the state to step in the place of what these childcare providers have been doing for years, it's too much. It's too expensive. And we don't want to pay any more taxes. I don't want to pay any more taxes. But again, I don't want to sit in another conversation next year talking about how much it cost. Because for us, the providers on the ground, it has cost us almost everything. And we don't even have the time to come up here and just give voice to that. So I apologize for being emotional. That wasn't my plan, but it was deeply hurtful given the daily sacrifice that I see with these incredible childcare providers standing in the gap for these kids and these families, and the fear that they have that they're going to lose everything, and all the ways that we have to scramble as advocates to support them. And now we're coming to the state to say, do your job. Do your job. Pick up the cost. For me, the debate is over. The debate is over. We know the benefits to the state to doing it. We know the cost to the state for doing this. And I think it's high time that we stop having these conversations about, can the state afford it? We just lost several childcare centers because people don't have the resource to continue to do this. And I don't want to come back here next year to have this conversation about cost, because there's always a cost. But the question is, who will continue to pay the cost? The most vulnerable providers in the state, or where it rightfully belongs, which is in the budget of Connecticut. And we will know about a person's value based on their budget. And if Connecticut does not pass 5,003, we will hear once again that we don't value children. We don't value the providers that stand in the gap. We don't value the people that step up every single year to support the state in a meaningful way. And that's all I have to say. And I'll just ask for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Goldburn. Sorry, Goldburn. I apologize. Thank you for putting such a human face on what childcare providers are going through and making the case for them. Hopefully, everyone has heard you. I also recognize that it was a terrible time during COVID, and I want to extend my appreciation for all you did.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Wheatlander.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Georgia, for not only showing the humanity behind it, but also the vulnerability that a lot of people are, like you said, women of color, the majority, find themselves in trying to do the work, stay in the work, and then how that leaves them also vulnerable in their whole life. And that's it's an important thing to remember that when someone isn't able to access health care, that means that their life is less healthy. They can't care for themselves the way they would normally want to. When you can't earn enough to put some money away for retirement or have a retirement account that you can pay into like other professions have, um, that leaves you more vulnerable in later in life. And it's really, I could not agree more that it's time, and the circle of care, without what you do, other families can't go to work. Specifically thinking about COVID, you allowed your care of those children allowed for doctors and nurses and hospital staff to do what they needed to do to care for our other loved ones. So thank you so much for being here today and speaking from your heart.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I just need to ask, did you submit your lovely testimony online?
No, I did not. I'm
Well,
going to,
okay.
but I am going to put in all of the wonderful bullets and stuff about the Care for Kids program. And if you would just indulge me to just to say, in connection to in connection to my statement, the provision to pay prospectively Care for Kids to providers is really very critical, because providers that are very vulnerable are waiting 40 to 45 days to be paid after a parent comes in. And if they are a center that's filled with 90%, 80 to 90% of Care for Kids family, that's a very long time to wait to get your paycheck. 45 days is not reasonable to ask someone to work and then wait to be paid. And so I think the provision to pay prospectively is something that's important. It is something that they do in Early Start. We are a part of CERCLE is an intermediary for the state of Connecticut in helping family child care providers to get the Early Start grant. And we have seen just the incredible stabilization that it has produced in the system because OEC is paying prospectively with the Early Start. So I think I want to point out that this is enshrined in the federal law that you pay prospectively. So Connecticut is basically just delaying when this provision occurs. So I would just urge the committee to ensure that this is something that we do not have to wait a year or two for providers, because that is the worry in our Circle network, is that if there's any type of crisis around payroll or disruption in Care for Kids because they're waiting to be paid, that they have to put these charges on high interest credit cards to be able to pay for those things. So I will just thank you for indulging me just to say that.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
Okay.